Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you so much for joining us.
So great to be here. Thank you for doing this. How are you, Joy? Good to see you.
Thanks for coming all the way from Hawaii.
Aloha. How you guys doing? I could hear you all the way in the back. Sounds great.
This is not your average presidential forum, I'll tell you right now.
I'm loving it.
We're breaking the mold.
That's right.
Let's begin with this. As a veteran, what will you do to restore full service rights for transgender members of the military? And as a follow-up, what is your plan to ensure the full civil rights of transgender Americans?
You know, this is something that hits me close to home. I'm a soldier in the Hawaii Army National Guard. There you go. I've served for a little over 16 years and deployed twice to the Middle East. My first deployment was to Iraq in 2005, second in 2008, and serving downrange, serving in a war zone, serving with Americans from all across this country, including LGBTQ Americans. It is something that there's a bond. There's a bond where I knew that if it came down to it, they would give their life for me. I would give my life for them. Special, amazing, selfless people who said, I will lay my life down for this country. That's a special and rare thing, and we as a country need to honor that service. We need to end the trans ban and make sure that we are actually living up to that ideal and those freedoms that so many service members have sacrificed so much for over generations. Freedoms for every single American, which unfortunately for the LGBTQ community is still not realized today.
You know, and I have a question also touching on your service in the military and, of course, your service in Congress. A lot of it has been around foreign policy issues. You've really been upfront on those kinds of issues. A lot of us have just been reading through the Mueller reports, quite lengthy. But one of the things that it touched on was the ways in which Russia specifically targeted communities of color, impersonating Black Lives Matter, going after women of color, Black women, and using that to divide the electorate and to discourage African American voters. And the second piece being literally targeting some of the voter rolls, going after voting systems in multiple states. Do you believe that Russia is a threat to the voting rights of people of color?
I think Russia, what was done, as well as any other country that seeks to interfere in our democracy and in our elections, is unacceptable, and it has to be taken seriously for the threat that it provides. I think it's important, that second point that you made about actually trying to interfere in the voter rolls, in our elections systems. This is the huge vulnerability that threatens our next election that so far, unfortunately, has not been addressed. The fact that there are still many states in this country who don't have paper ballots or any kind of auditable paper trail to make sure that whether it's another country or an individual rogue actor comes in and tries to manipulate our votes, tries to change our votes to change the outcome of this election, our system is vulnerable to those hacks and attacks today. So I've introduced legislation in Congress called the Securing America's Elections Act. Very simply put, solves this problem by making sure that every single state either uses paper ballots or has a voter-verified paper backup, so that we in this country have an auditable paper trail to protect our democracy.
And do you think the current administration is doing enough to combat that kind of interference in 2020?
No, and I'll take it a step further. This administration is not doing enough. The Department of Homeland Security, that has jurisdiction over our election security, is not doing nearly enough, and Congress is not doing enough. I introduced this legislation in 2017. It has not been taken up in committee or on the House floor, nor has there been any other meaningful reforms that would accomplish this same objective. It is essential for us as voters to have faith that when we cast that vote, our voices will be heard. That's what my bill does, and that's what Congress needs to pass.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to thank you very much for that. Let's have our first audience question. Welcome.
Hi, Congresswoman Gabbard.
Aloha.
My question for you, my name is Amara Zakaria, and my question for you is, what will you do to repeal the Muslim ban?
Thank you. Thank you for your question and for being here. Ever since President Trump put this ban in place, I have stood in strong opposition to it. And as president, I would lift that ban that is hurting and harming so many people and so many families, both here and in other countries around the world. I hear from both constituents of mine in Hawaii and friends in other parts of the country about their family members, their parents, siblings, uncles and aunts who previously would travel to and from the United States, whether it be from countries like Iran or other countries, and now are completely unable to do so. So this is something that's very important that has to be addressed, and I would do so as president. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
I want to follow up and say, in this era where Islamophobia is coming from the White House, what would you do to secure the civil rights of Muslim Americans?
This is such a dangerous time. You know, we just saw the attacks against Christians in their place of worship on Easter Sunday in Sri Lanka. We saw the terrorist attack against Muslims in their place of worship in Christchurch. Terrorist attack against people who are worshiping in their synagogue in Pittsburgh. This is a time where we as a country, starting at the top, as president, but where all of us must stand up and condemn this hatred and bigotry and violence, whether it be based on religious reasons or the color of your skin or your ethnicity or where you come from. We have to speak with one voice to condemn this bigotry, to make it so that it is not okay, whether it be a slur or worse yet, an act of violence. This is not who we are in this country, and that leadership starts at the top. That leadership is what I would bring, coming from a place like Hawaii, where we are the most ethnically diverse state in the nation. We are diverse in many different ways, and what is so special is the aloha spirit, something that we call the aloha spirit, which basically means having respect and love and care for one another as children of God, bridging that divide that exists between us, recognizing each other, respecting each other. We'll have our differences. We can disagree without being disagreeable, but it is that recognition and that care for each other that we need at the forefront of this country so badly.
And I believe, do we have one more question? I think we do. Come on out.
Hi.
Aloha.
Hi, Congresswoman Gabbard. My name is Sadie Hernandez, and I'm a member of United We Dream Action. I was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, but I'm here to ask about something that affects all of us. Last year, Puerto Rico suffered a devastating hurricane and has only received a fraction of the promised $19 billion to rebuild and provide for our fellow citizens. What is your immediate commitment to Puerto Rico, and do you support statehood as a long-term solution?
Thank you for being here and for your engagement and your activity in dealing with the continued challenges that dreamers in this country face, but also in raising this important issue that Puerto Ricans are continuing to deal with in not getting that immediate response that they should have gotten from our country during a time of great need and horrific disaster. This is something that we in Congress have continuously been trying very hard to push for, recognizing that unlike what you may hear from others, Puerto Ricans are Americans too. So we need, I'm going to get to your second question, I'm not going to leave you hanging. So we need to make sure that our whether it's FEMA or our other disaster response organizations within the federal government are providing every single resource that we have available to help in these recovery efforts, not only in the short term, in the first 30, 60, 90 days, but as we're continuing to see in Puerto Rico, that recovery is continuing. I support the Puerto Rican people's right to self-determination. And if that means statehood, then that should be supported.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
having
your
me.
question.
Thank you very much. So our exit question with each of the candidates is, with so many options on the table, 20 that we know of, why should women of color choose you?
Look, again, coming from Hawaii, have a unique experience that I bring to the forefront and that I feel is so strongly needed in this country now. Not only in coming from such a diverse state and having these own experiences that I bring to the forefront, but really recognizing that as there are so many different issues and problems and challenges that we need to address in this country, at the heart of all of them is ultimately we have self-serving politicians looking out for their own interests, greedy corporate interests looking out for their own bottom line, and we, the people, get left behind. The vision that our founders had for this country of a government of, by, and for the people has been lost. So we need to change this corrupt culture that is standing in the way of progress, that is standing in the way of our voices being heard, that is standing in the way of our votes being counted. That needs to change. So as a soldier, someone who understands in a very deep and personal way what it means to put service above self, those values of putting service above self is what I will bring to the White House, to make sure that that mission, the mission of the President and the White House and our nation's capital, is solely focused on how we can best serve the American people.
Can I jump in and ask one quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Because we do have the benefit of having you here, and you're a military veteran. For veterans, for people who are serving and who would want to know what kind of a foreign policy that you would have, because that impacts them directly.
Yeah.
In the Middle East, what would be your posture toward the Yemen situation, toward Saudi Arabia, toward Syria?
Thank you. You're right. You know, I deployed twice to the Middle East, lost too many of my friends in combat, people who paid the ultimate price, as our country has unfortunately continued this policy of waging regime change wars in other countries around the world. Regime change wars that have not only taken such a high toll on our service members, on our veterans, on our military families, but have actually increased the suffering of people in the countries where we wage these wars, increased the death and destruction in their lives and in their community, all while actually making our country less safe, while increasing and strengthening terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This is what I will change as President and Commander-in-Chief, bringing these experiences to the forefront to end these destructive regime change war policies, focus on how we can actually strengthen our national security, to end U.S. support for Saudi Arabia and their genocidal war that's occurring in Yemen as we speak. U.S. support that's not been authorized by Congress and violates the War Powers Act.
Yeah, and I know that there's a lot of controversy over your stance towards Syria. Do you believe that the U.S. should stop engagement militarily in Syria? And what would be your posture as president toward Bashar al-Assad?
Our military's mission and purpose is to keep the American people safe. So our troops deployed to Syria initially to work with the Kurdish forces on the ground to go after and defeat ISIS. That mission has largely been accomplished. Unfortunately, as this was happening since 2011, covertly initially with the CIA, there was a regime change war that was launched during that time. As part of that war, and many of you may not even be aware of this, but our taxpayer dollars were being used to provide both direct and indirect support to terrorist groups in Syria like Al-Qaeda and others in order to go in and topple the Assad government. I had a chance to go to Syria, where I heard from the Syrian people. I heard from religious leaders who pleaded and begged for the United States to stop this support because they knew, whether there were some who supported their Assad government, others wanted to see him go, they knew that if the United States and other countries were successful in this regime change war, the most powerful force on the ground would fill that vacuum. And the most powerful force were these terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, whose sole mission was to wipe out Christians and other religious minorities in Syria, anyone who did not adhere to their extremist ideology. So this is the reality that we face. There are, unfortunately, a lot of bad people in the world, some of them dictators and leaders of these other countries. The United States cannot continue to be in a position thinking that we can be the policemen of the world, spending trillions of taxpayer dollars coming out of our pockets, coming out of our communities, to go and launch these wars that we've seen in Iraq and Libya and Syria have caused so much suffering, taken countless lives. This cost is something that we cannot accept. We need to end these regime change wars, end this new Cold War and nuclear arms race we are in, and bring the trillions of dollars that we are spending on these wars and these weapons and invest them in our people, in our communities, by doing things like providing health care for all, by making sure we get a quality education for our kids, by making sure we're fixing the broken infrastructure in this country, by actually investing in our future.
And Congresswoman.
Thank you for answering the question.
Thank you so
Appreciate it.
much.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for
Great to
joining
see
us.
you.
Really appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Joy. Nice
Cheers.
to see
And
you.
I'll walk you up this way.
Thank you, everybody. Aloha.